What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over different game modes and match types within our Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series. So specifically in today's episode, I will be able to go into my game, and then on the character select, I now have options, quite like you've seen in something like Smash Brothers, where I can change the game mode or the match type. So I have standard, which would be like a timed mode or a score mode to see how many KOs you can get, something like that. Stock, which is whoever is last alive with, that amount of lives that they're given. And coin, which is another Smash mode. You could have as many as you want. You could create custom. The details really aren't important. Just showing that I have different modes here. I can select them by selecting these arrows on the character select. Then when I go into the game, doesn't matter what stage I pick, I can pick random. We need to change things based on what has occurred. So this is going to be a multi-part mini-series within the Platform Fighter series where we can go over all the different match types and game modes, setting them up one by one. In today's episode, I'm just going to make sure we can change them and then make other logic in the game change based off of that. So we're not going to go into the specifics of standard, stock, coin, or anything else. We're just going to go over being able to change it and showing that we can change it. You can see I selected standard on the character select. So in the actual level in the game, we have standard displaying up top. Okay. And we can do everything as normal. Nothing changed here. Right? But now we know that we are in the standard game mode. Now let's say we close this, we relaunch. We can do this again. We don't have to put in a name, but we can do that. I can change it to then stock and then start on a stage. And now stock is the mode we're in. Lastly, just to go through all the examples, we can go ahead and select coin and load it up, and you'll see we are in the coin mode. So you can see we can actually change the mode in the character select, and it can change what we are doing when we get into this match. That's what we're covering today. We're not covering the specifics of any of those mode types, although they will be covered in the very near future. Alright, so to get started, this is episode 44 of the Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series. So we've come a long way. We still have a really long way to go. But if you want to get caught up and check out everything we've done and how we've gotten to this point, feel free to click this icon in the top right corner right here. You can check out every single episode that's in the series or related to the series. Alternatively, if you just want to check out different game modes and match types, I would recommend you check out this episode here, which is where we first set up the game instance, and we're going to be using that today for setting our match type variables and determining what match we are actually in when we go into the game. Alright, with that said, we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is actually in the code today. Now, I've said this in a few episodes, so you might have heard me, but we are now using Visual Studio 2022 for the Super Smash Bros. And Platform Fighter tutorial series. You can keep using whatever version of Visual Studio you have been using. It is not a big deal. I just upgraded because I had to for some other reasons unrelated to this series, and I figured I might as well address that and let you guys know. So when you notice that things are different, it's nothing that you have to worry about or change. You can keep doing what you're doing. I'm just showing you what I've got now. With that out of the way, in our code, we have to make a new variable to determine what type of match this is. Because at the end of the day, we can spawn a level and open it and load it up and go to a certain game mode, and that's great. But so much of our logic could depend on what game mode we're in. So if we are in a stock game as opposed to a coin game, the logic is going to be different for both the actual game mode logic of the win conditions and things like that, but also the logic of what's going to be displayed. So we may have a coin counter as opposed to stock counts down below the character or something similar, and thus we need to make sure that that is available to the user. Now, take note, while I'm saying things like game mode here, we're not actually talking about Unreal's game mode. You could make separate game modes if you wanted, but we're not actually going to do that. That's why I'm calling it like a match type instead when I can. It is a game mode, but it's not Unreal's game mode, and that can be confusing because the terms are so similar. So think of it as just like a match type. So the first thing we're going to do is go to our base game instance.h. Now we have quite a few things set up in here already, like F player details and an E character class structure. I'm going to add something new today, and that is going to be this E match type structure. So you can go ahead and copy this sort of behavior. We need it to be an enum that is visible in the blueprint, so we need it to be U enum of blueprint type. And then I'm making a enum class E match type off of unsigned integer 8. So in here, we're going to set up all of our variables for our different types of matches that we can have. We're going to have standard, stock, and coin in this example, but the list could go on and on and on. You could have a ton in here depending on how many different modes you want to have. You can name them whatever you want as well. This is just an example. And this UMeta display name equals, this is what it's going to show up as when we see it in the blueprint. So instead of saying E underscore standard, it'll just show up as standard, so we know which one it is. All right. So go ahead and set up all of your values, as many as you want to put in here. Just make this match type enum, add all your different match types to it. When we're done, we have to scroll down till we get to our class with our base game instance, and we have our players, num players, and is device used for multiple players variables. We're going to add another variable in there, and that's just going to keep track of the current match type. So for that, we just want to make an eMatch type variable, so the enum we just made, and I just called it match type, very simple. And then we make a U property to make sure we can get it in the blueprint. I have an edit anywhere in blueprint read write, so we can access it and change it in the blueprint. However, I actually should change the category from player references to something like match info. The category is just for visual reference, so it's not required that you set it to anything. But it definitely shouldn't be player references. It's more of a match data variable. Now you can set this to a default value in your base game instance.cpp, but I never set up a constructor in here and set the other variables. It's technically fine without it. Enums will default to the first value in the list. So we will just default to standard, which is fine because I put the default that I wanted at the top of the list anyway. Once you have this variable, you can build, launch the game again, get the editor up. Now, once we are in the editor, we're going to want to add logic to check for this variable and then do certain things based on that. But before that, we actually want to be able to set this variable. So certain matches, certain game modes and match types may be set automatically when we're playing our game. For example, if we go into the story mode, well, we may have a story mode match type. That is not something the user or the player is going to pick, but rather the game is going to pick it when they select that option. So they're not going to go into story mode and select stock or standard or coin, right? It's just going to automatically set it to story mode. However, with that said, when we go into something like a versus mode, we could go ahead and select the mode that we actually want to use. So on our character select screen, we can go ahead and set those values. So what I've done is opened up the character select screen widget. I moved down my character 1 button and image, character 2 button and image, character 3 button and image. So I had some more space up top. Then I added 2 buttons and a piece of text up here. And this will determine what match type we are in. Whatever it says on here is the current match type that the variable has. And then we can change it by pressing these 2 buttons. So pretty simple what I did here. But I added a button on the screen, just literally drag it on, and I called it left match type button. Then I brought another one on the screen and called it right match type button. Lastly, I brought text onto the screen and called it match type text. So all very simple, standard widgets here. I'll show you my settings for them if you are interested, but really this is just going to come down to how you want it to look, so it's not super important. So for the left match type button, you can see my data. I've anchored it to the top middle, and then I put the alignment to 0.5. When you see me do something like that, what that means is if there is no offset, it is going to display directly in the middle of the widget. This line right here coming down is the middle of this widget, and you can see that this button, the green outline, is directly in the center of that. I'm going to undo that because I do have offsets, like I said, to put them where I want them. But other than that, this is all entirely up to you. You can see my positions, feel free to use them, but again, it's probably going to change for you. Now, I have 3 different images that I've imported, and we've imported different images in the series before, so you should be familiar with that. But basically, if you have a PNG or any sort of image file, you can add it to a folder in Unreal. Unreal will automatically import it for you as a texture. Then, when you go to select an image, say on this style of your button, you can just search for whatever you name that file and find them. I have 1, 2, and 3. 1 is for default, 2 is for hover, 3 is for press. So then on each of these buttons, the left one and the right one, I've set the normal as 1, hovered as 2, pressed as 3. Now this little arrow is a basic image I made in Paint. So all I did was draw out this little arrow, save it out to a file, and then put them in here. Make sure you do draw as an image as opposed to some of the other options if you want it to look exactly like you saved it out, and change your image size to match the size that you want. For example, if I change this, it's going to change the actual size of the image. So I want it to be exactly what I set it to. Like I said, this is pretty much all stuff that you are going to do on your own because it's going to depend on how you want it to look. But there you go. So there's nothing else we have to do visually in here. There will be a few other things we do with it, but I'm just kind of showing you examples. Right mouse button. Again, if you want to look it over, I'll show you everything real quick. But I'm not going to go into every little detail because it's all visual. Lastly is the text. So for the text, I've anchored it to the top middle as well. And here are all my settings. Anything that's not open, you can assume is left the default. And there you go. So pretty simple stuff. I've just made 3 things that are pretty visually appealing, right? Because it's text and then a button on each side that we can click. So it makes a lot of sense from the user's perspective. They can come into the game, go onto the screen. You see if I hover, it's very faint, but if I hover, the color of the button changes. And then when I hold, it changes to an even darker color. And same with this one. So that's the effect I'm going for. And this will work with controller as well when we do it. And I'll show you why in a few minutes. So we can close that. Now what we want to do is bind this text to match the actual value that it should be. So for example, if we are in the standard match type, well, we want to display standard. If we're in stock, we want to display stock because we're trying to display the current match type to the user, to the players. So we need this to be accurate and showing what the value really is. We can bind the text to, you see that I defaulted it to match type, but we can actually just bind it to be an appropriate value when we're in the game. So if you click on the text, go over to content text under the details panel, you can then click this little button and create a binding. Now, if you don't have one in here, it's going to say add binding or plus or create binding. It can say a few different things depending on your version. Basically, it'll just be right next to your actual text. You'll have a text box here where you can enter text, and then there'll be a little plus here where you can add a binding. Just click it and create a binding. When you do this, it'll automatically bring you to the graph and to that binding. It'll look like this. It'll probably be named get match type or whatever your variable is. So mine's match type text right here. So mine was get match type text. Underscore text underscore 0, just because that's the default convention for it. It's a little ugly, so I renamed it. You can just right click on it and rename a function. And what we're doing is actually very simple. We're going to use our game instance reference and grab the match type variable we made earlier in the episode, perform a switch statement on it, and then return the appropriate value. Now, if you've been following the series, you'll have this game instance reference already as a variable on the character select screen. However, if you're not, I'll show you what I did to get it. It's very simple. If you go to your event construct of the widget you're trying to do this in, I call a node get game instance, and this returns the current game instance that this project is using. We can cast it to our game instance, base game instance, and assuming this cast succeeds, so only off the top node here, not the cast failed, we can set a variable that is a game instance reference. So you can drag off of this blue node and type promote to variable, or just click it right here. And then name it whatever you want, again, like game instance reference. So there you go. We have this game instance reference. And so once you use it here in this binding, you can get it. You can right click on it, convert it to a validated get. And this way, only if it's valid do we want to do this. If it's not valid, we could get errors or even a crash, so we just want to ignore it. But you drag off your game instance reference and look for match type. You should be able to get it now. Once you get it, you'll have this, and you can drag off of it and grab a switch statement. Okay, and that's how we get all of this right here. Now, since this is a binding, it returns text. Okay, it returns whatever this field is. This is text. So we're trying to return the text that we want it to print. You could take the enum's display name and do that, or you could just manually write it like I did. We may want to change the names without changing the internal values, so I did manually write them. But this is entirely up to you. The important part is to take the return node that is there and give it a value. So for my standard switch statement value, I'm returning standard. Very simple. Then I add return node 2 more times to have 3, because I have 3 possible switch statement cases here. And then on stock, I return stock, and on coin, I return coin. It's very simple. All right, now remember I was just saying that those buttons would work on controller? Well, they have to work on mouse first, but they will also work on controller. So let's show you how that can work. Let's go to the designer, and we can click on each button, the left mouse button and the right mouse button. If we scroll all the way down on each of these buttons, we can see the events bound to them, or the events that can be bound to them. We want to click the plus on pressed. If we add on pressed here, whenever this is selected for any reason, we will do this logic. So in this case, it's going to be on pressed from a click, but it can also be on pressed from either Unreal's default navigation or a manual event that we fire, such as when using a controller. So go ahead and click that on pressed plus button for each of these buttons, and you'll get on pressed left match type button and on pressed right match type button. From here, we're going to do something very similar to what we just did in the binding, except that we're going to be setting the match type as opposed to getting it. So in this case, I don't actually convert to validated get, because these can only fire after the event construct has played. And if the game instance isn't valid here, then there's a bigger issue at play. So we'll run into other problems anyway, so we can skip the validated get here. We just want to grab our game instance reference, get our match type, perform a switch on it, and then there we go. Now what we have to do is set the match type variable. So we drag off our game instance reference, set match type, and then you'll have this node right here, and it'll default to the standard, and then you can click the drop down and select the value you want. There are a ton of ways to do this. I did it a simple way right now. We may have to make it more complicated as we get more match types in here and as this grows. However, this is perfectly fine as it is. So we can assume we're starting on the default, but it doesn't really matter where we're starting. It just matters what the current value is. So you can read it like this. If the current match type is standard and we're pressing left, then standard is the first in the list. So going backward makes me think I want to loop around and go to the end value. So the end value is coin. So I want to set the match type to coin. Now if we're on stock, going backward or going to the left is going to standard. So I want to set the match type to standard. Lastly, if we're on coin and we go to the left, we want to set the value to stock. Now let's look at the right button. If we're on standard, which is the first case, and we press right, we want to go to the next one, which is stock. If we're on stock and we press right, we want to go to the next one, which is coin. And lastly, if we're on coin and we press right, we want to go to the next one, which is the end of the list. So we're going to loop around and go back up to standard. So that's all I'm doing. I'm just setting the match type based off of where we're at and where we want to be on either a left or right button press. So with that done, you should be able to go and select your match type and set it, and it should actually work. Now you can debug it by just grabbing the value and printing it out, or by looking at it in the editor, or by using breakpoints. There's a ton of methods to do this. But in our character HUD, we're going to be displaying it anyway, so you can go ahead and just follow along to this part. And so very, very simple. On my character HUD widget, I've gone ahead and added another text box outside of all of the player cards and all that. So it's just part of the canvas panel, but not part of the player cards. I gave it default text of standard. I called it match type text. And then you can imagine what I did, but I've gone ahead and I've bound this function. So I click the drop down, create binding. It brought me into the graph. Here, you see this is, I did not rename it, so you can see how ugly it can be sometimes. You can rename it here, right? So instead of get match type text underscore 0, you could just type get match type text like that. It'll work all the same. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did before, actually. So the same get match type text logic that you used in the character select, we're going to use here. So you can copy it if you want and paste it in. Just make sure you hook it up, or you can write it again. But we're going to take our game instance reference, checking if it's valid or not. Again, the character HUD does have this by default if you've been following the series. But if you haven't, you can go ahead and add it. It's super simple. It's just these 3 nodes I've highlighted. Then we grab our match type variable off that, throw it into a switch statement, and return the appropriate logic on the HUD. So we want to return standard if it's standard, stock if it's stock, coin if it's coin. At that point, we are actually good to go, and we can go ahead and launch our game, and we will be able to select our mode and have the mode displayed up top. And with that, guys, that's actually all we need to do. And we have our match type set up so that we can go ahead and play around with them in future episodes. Because in the next few episodes, we're going to be covering things like changing it so we have that actual timed mode, the stock mode, and the coin mode. And then we're going to allow us to change between them and change the win conditions and change what show up on, the HUD. Because again, the HUD won't be showing stock if it's coin and things like that. So we got a lot of freedom now. We can change things as we want to, and we can change them only for the match types and the game modes we want to. But that's all I got for you, so I hope you enjoyed. If this helps you make your different match types in your Super Smash Bros. Or Platform Fighter tutorial series, or whatever game you may be working on, then please subscribe. It does more for myself and the series than anything else you can do, and it's completely free to do. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for everything that you do, all the extra support. I'm really, really grateful, and seeing you guys as excited about these series as I am really gets me pumped up and ready to work on more. So thank you so much for everything. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It is completely free. I'd be happy to assist you, get you back on the right track so you can keep working on your game. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.